At Thanksgiving dinner, my son handed me an eviction notice for my own home. He looked at me, his voice cold. In 48 hours, we need this house. His wife sat beside him smiling as if this were just a normal transaction. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. I simply opened the envelope, read every word, then looked straight at my son like someone who had just understood everything. But the next day, when my lawyer walked through the door with another envelope, my son's face turned pale as if he had just realized everything was over. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this story. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever trusted someone who turned against you? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Note some details are fictionalized for storytelling purposes, and any similarities are purely coincidental. The envelope landed beside the gravy boat with a sound like a verdict being delivered. Not a thud, something quieter, more final. The cream-colored paper caught the chandelier light as it slid across my mahogany table, coming to rest against the sweet potato casserole my neighbor had brought over, and my son Julian sat back in his chair like he had just said grace. My name is Michael Carter. I am 72 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 35 years designing bridges for the Georgia Department of Transportation. I was sitting at the head of my own Thanksgiving table when my son tried to steal my house. Julian Carter. My 41-year-old son sat across from me wearing a suit that cost more than his integrity. His dark hair was slicked back, and his smile carried the same cold confidence he had worn the day he asked me to co-sign a loan I knew he would never repay. Beside him sat Elena Carter, my daughter-in-law of 9 years, a 38-year-old former luxury real estate stager with champagne taste, and a smile that could make cruelty look like customer service. The turkey was still steaming. I had spent 6 hours on that bird, brined it overnight, rubbed it with sage and butter at 5 in the morning, basted it every 45 minutes like my late wife Constance had taught me. The stuffing was her recipe too. Cornbread and sausage with just enough cayenne to make you remember you were in Georgia. And now there was a legal envelope sitting next to the gravy boat, and my son was watching me with the patience of a man who had already won. Have you ever watched someone you raised calculate your worth in square footage? I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind lawyers use when they want you to feel the weight of what is coming before you even read the words. I slid my thumb under the seal and pulled out the document. Inside, notice to vacate, 48 hours. The words swam in front of my eyes. I read them again, then a third time because surely I was misunderstanding something. Surely my son had not driven 3 hours from Atlanta to hand me an eviction notice on Thanksgiving. 48 hours, Dad. Julian's voice was calm, rehearsed. That is the legal requirement for notice. I wanted to give you the dignity of hearing it from family, not a process server. Dignity. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. We are not trying to hurt you, Michael. Elena leaned forward, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. We are trying to help you transition to something more manageable. Transition. There was that word again. The word people use when they want to take something from you but need it to sound like a favor. I looked around the dining room. The mahogany table I was sitting at had belonged to my father. I had refinished it myself in 1987, sanding down decades of scratches and water rings until the wood gleamed like new. The floors beneath my feet were heart pine original to the house, and I had spent 3 summers on my hands and knees restoring them after a pipe burst in the winter of 2003. The addition off the back, the sunroom where Constance used to read her novels, I had built that with my own hands in 1995. Poured the foundation on a Saturday morning while Julian, then 11 years old, handed me tools and asked questions about why concrete needed to cure. Let me tell you something about the way cruelty works in families like mine. It does not arrive screaming. It arrives smiling, holding a casserole dish, asking if you have lost weight. It sits at your table and eats your food and waits for the right moment to slide an envelope across the wood and explain why taking everything you have built is actually for your own good. This is my home, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I built the addition with my own hands. I refinished these floors, and we appreciate that. Julian nodded like a banker approving a loan. But Oak Ridge needs someone who can actually maintain it. someone with the resources to keep it in the family properly. Properly? As if I had been doing it wrong for 40 years. As if the house that had sheltered 3 generations of Carters was somehow failing because a 72-year-old man lived in it alone. The chandelier above us, the one Constance had picked out in 1989 from an antique shop in Charleston, cast warm light across the table, across the untouched turkey, across the eviction notice in my hands, across the faces of my son and his wife who had driven 3 hours to ambush me on a holiday because they knew I would open my door. 48 hours, that is what 40 years of building a home was worth to my son. 2 days. I set the notice down on the table. My hands were not shaking. I was surprised by that. I had expected them to shake. "You came on Thanksgiving," I said slowly, "because you knew I would let you in." Julian's smile flickered, just for a moment, just enough for me to see the calculation behind it. "We came on Thanksgiving because we are family, Dad." "No," I shook my head. "You came on Thanksgiving because a process server would have given me time to think, time to call a lawyer, time to fight. You came to my table, ate my food, and handed me this because you wanted me shocked and alone and too confused to do anything but sign whatever you put in front of me." The room went quiet. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Elena folded her napkin with the precision of someone who had practiced this moment. And when she looked up at me, her smile carried the weight of something I had not yet seen. Her hand drifted beneath her chair and came back up holding a folder. A thick folder, full of papers that made the eviction notice look like a greeting card. "Michael," she said sweetly, "we were hoping it would not come to this. But since you want to make things difficult, perhaps you should see what else we brought." Elena opened the folder with the deliberate slowness of a dealer revealing cards. Inside were more documents, more legal papers, but Julian was already reaching beneath his own chair. He produced a tablet, sleek, expensive, the kind of device that costs more than some people's monthly rent. He turned it toward me with the casual confidence of a man presenting evidence in a case he had already won. "You signed this last month, Dad." Julian's voice was patient, almost gentle. "October 14th, to be exact, during one of your good days." Elena witnessed it. I stared at the screen. A transfer of ownership agreement filled the display, complete with legal language dense enough to drown in. And at the bottom, a signature. My signature. Every loop of the A, every slant of the V, every trailing line at the end of my name, it was perfect. It was me. Except it was not me. I never signed anything. My voice came out hoarse. I would remember signing away my home. Julian exchanged a look with Elena, the kind of look doctors share when a patient insists they feel fine while the monitors tell a different story. That is exactly the problem, is it not? Julian leaned forward, his elbows on my table, his face arranged in careful concern. "You do not remember? The doctors warned us this would happen. The confusion, the gaps. I want you to understand something. When your own child looks you in the eye and tells you that you are losing your mind, there is a moment, just a heartbeat, where you believe them, where you wonder if maybe they are right. Maybe you did sign something and forgot. Maybe the cracks in your memory are wider than you thought. Maybe you are standing on ice that has already begun to break. That moment is what Julian was counting on. We recorded the signing, Michael." Elena's voice cut through my doubt like a scalpel. "For your protection. So there would be no confusion later." My hands had stopped trembling. Something cold was settling into my bones. Not fear, but recognition. The recognition of a trap being sprung by people who had been building it for months. "Show me this recording." Julian's jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly, but I had watched that face for 41 years. I knew every tell, every twitch, every flicker of the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee and now sat across from me trying to steal my home. The file was corrupted. His voice remained steady, but his eyes did not. Technical issue. But the signature is legally binding. That is what matters. How convenient. I set the tablet down on the table beside the cooling turkey, beside the untouched stuffing, beside the ruins of what should have been a family meal. A corrupted file and a signature I do not remember making. I picked up the tablet again. The signature on that screen was a ghost of me. Every loop, every slant, every pressure point, it was me without being me. like looking at your reflection in a funhouse mirror and watching it move independently. I had spent 35 years signing engineering documents, approvals contracts. I knew my own handwriting the way a musician knows their own voice. This was not my handwriting. This was my handwriting's corpse reanimated by someone who had studied it long enough to replicate every quirk and hesitation. The slight tremor on the downstroke of the A that had started 3 years ago when the arthritis began. The way my V always leaned a little too far right. The unconscious pause between my first and last name that left a microscopic gap in the ink flow. All of it was there. All of it was perfect. All of it was impossible. Dad, Julian's voice had shifted. Less confident now, more urgent. The house is worth $1.8 million. You cannot maintain it alone. The property taxes, the insurance, the repairs, you are drowning, and you refuse to admit it. We are trying to help you. Help me. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing Julian's face. You manufactured a signature. You created a fake document. You came to my home on Thanksgiving to gaslight me into believing I am losing my mind so you could steal the house my father built. That is not help. That is theft. Elena started to speak, but Julian held up his hand. His mask was cracking now. I could see the desperation underneath the hungry calculation, the cornered animal energy of a man who had bet everything on one play and was watching it fall apart. You are confused, Dad? His voice was harder now. The pretense of gentle concern was evaporating. We have the document. We have witnesses. No court in Georgia is going to side with a 72-year-old man who cannot remember what he signed last month. I said nothing. My eyes had drifted back to the tablet screen, to the date stamp glowing in the corner of the forged document. October 14th. The date burned into the display like a brand. October 14th, when I was lying on a hospital gurney at Savannah Memorial with electrodes taped to my chest. October 14th, when Dr. Patterson ran a cardiac stress test that took 4 hours because my blood pressure kept spiking. October 14th, when I could not have signed anything because I was being monitored for the heart attack my son was apparently hoping I would have. I looked up from the tablet, and for the first time since the envelope landed on my table, I smiled. Julian's expression flickered confusion, then concern. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for an old man's surrender, broken and bewildered, and ready to sign whatever they put in front of him. But he had not prepared for me to remember exactly where I was on October 14th. And he definitely had not prepared for me to have proof. The discharge papers were in my desk, signed by Dr. Patterson, time-stamped by Savannah Memorial Hospital. My son had forged the perfect signature on the worst possible date, and now sitting at my own Thanksgiving table, surrounded by the wreckage of my family, I had something Julian never expected me to have. Hope. My father knew. Sitting there at my Thanksgiving table with Julian's forged signature burning on the tablet screen between us, I understood with sudden, terrible clarity that my father had seen this coming. Elias Carter had watched his grandson circle like a vulture for years, and the old man had done something about it. I kept my smile hidden behind the coffee cup I raised to my lips. Julian was watching me, trying to read my expression, trying to understand why I had not crumbled the way he expected. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. Because while he sat there calculating his next move, my mind was already drifting backward to the last year of my father's life, and everything I had failed to understand until this moment. My father, Elias Carter, had passed away 8 months earlier at 94. He was a man who built a 12-store hardware empire from a single shop on Bull Street, and who had spent his final years watching his grandson, Julian, circle like a vulture with a calculator. I thought I understood my father. I was wrong. Let me tell you about the last year of my father's life. Not the medical details, the cardiology appointments 3 times a week, the oxygen concentrator humming in the corner of his bedroom, the way his hands shook when he tried to button his own shirt. I want to tell you about what he saw, because Elias Carter spent 94 years reading people, and in his final year, he read his grandson like a balance sheet running red. I drove him to every appointment. I paid for the roof repairs when the insurance claim fell through $14,000 from my retirement account. I spent my weekends on my hands and knees refinishing the hardwood floors in the hallway, and my evenings replacing the rotted boards on the wraparound porch that had been sagging since 2019. Julian came by 4 times that year, 4 times in 12 months, and every single visit he asked about the will. Julian came by Tuesday. My father's voice echoed in my memory, thin but sharp, as we sat on the new porch boards I had just finished staining. Asked about the trust again, 3rd time this month. I had made excuses for my son. He's just worried about you, Dad. My father had looked at me with those eyes that had seen everything: the depression through his parents' stories, the war through his older brother's absence, 60 years of customers trying to shortchange him at the register. No, son, he is worried about the house. There is a difference. I have watched him measure the rooms when he thinks I am not looking. I had not believed him. I had told myself it was paranoia, the suspicion of an old man whose mind was beginning to wander. But my father's mind never wandered. It was a steel trap, right until the end. Do you know what it costs to replace a porch that has been rotting for 15 years? $43,000. I know because I paid it. Julian knows too. He asked for the receipt so he could verify the asset improvement for future appraisals. My father was still alive when Julian asked. Still breathing, still watching, still taking notes in that quiet way of his. Michael, do you know what a man looks like when he is counting your silverware? My father had asked me that question over coffee one morning, his oxygen tube trailing across the kitchen floor. I built 12 hardware stores. I know that look. Your son has it every time he walks through the front door. 3 weeks before he died, my father told me he had an appointment downtown with a lawyer named Thorne. I offered to drive him. I always drove him, but he shook his head. You do not need to drive me. I have arranged a car. What kind of appointment? I had asked. My father had smiled then, the kind of smile he used to give suppliers who tried to overcharge him, the kind that made sure vultures go hungry. I did not understand. I thought it was the medication talking the morphine haze that sometimes clouded his words in those final weeks. But my father was not confused. My father was preparing. The last thing he said to me, the very last thing in the hospice room, with the oxygen hissing and the monitors beeping their slow countdown, was this: the house is yours, Michael. I made sure of it. Do not let the vultures tell you otherwise. I had held his hand and told him I understood. But I did not understand. Not then. Not until this moment, sitting at my Thanksgiving table with my son's forged signature glowing on a tablet and his wife's cold smile cutting across the candlelight. Julian was still watching me, still waiting for me to break. Dad, his voice was impatient now, we need to discuss the timeline. The moving company can have a truck here by Saturday. I did not answer. I was thinking about my desk. The old roll top in my study that had belonged to my grandfather before it belonged to my father before it belonged to me. In the top drawer beneath a stack of old utility bills I never got around to filing, there was a business card. Marcus Thorne, Thorne and Ashford Trust Services. Gold embossed lettering on cream cardstock. I had found it when I was cleaning out my father's things after the funeral. At the time, I assumed it was routine estate planning. I put it in my drawer and forgot about it. I was not going to forget about it anymore. In that same drawer, right next to the business card, were my discharge papers from Savannah Memorial Hospital, dated October 14th, signed by Dr. Patterson, time-stamped and witnessed, and absolutely impossible to have been produced by a man signing away his home. My father had given me exactly 2 weapons, the proof that Julian's signature was forged, and the phone number of the man who could explain what my father had really done to protect me. I set down my coffee cup and looked at my son. I think I said slowly that we are done talking for tonight. Julian's face went pale. He had not prepared for this. He had not prepared for an old man who refused to surrender. Julian and Elna had refused to leave. They sat at my dining table for 2 hours after I told them we were done talking, whispering strategies I could hear, but not quite make out. Elena kept checking her phone. Julian kept shuffling through the folder of documents they had brought. They were regrouping, planning their next move, waiting for the old man to crack. The doorbell rang at 12:47 a.m. 3 sharp notes that cut through the silence of my house like a judge's gavel. Julian's head snapped toward the foyer. Elena's phone clattered to the table. Whoever was at my door at this hour was not part of their plan. I rose from my chair, slowly feeling the ache in my knees, and walked to the front door. Through the sidelight window, I could see a figure in a charcoal overcoat, a leather folder tucked under one arm. I opened the door. Marcus Thorne stood on my porch, a 52-year-old trust administrator who had spent his career telling families things they did not want to hear in complete devastating sentences. He had silver-gray hair cropped close to his skull, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of face that gave nothing away until he wanted it to. "Mr. Carter," his voice was calm, professional, "I apologize for the hour, but I believe your son has made some miscalculations tonight that you need to understand before morning." I stepped aside and let him in. Julian appeared in the hallway, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked very much like fear. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus did not even glance at my son. He walked past him into the dining room and set his leather folder on the table right next to the cold turkey and the untouched pie. Marcus Thorne. Thorne and Ashford Trust Services. He opened the folder and began laying out documents with the precision of a surgeon arranging instruments. "I administered your grandfather's estate. I am here because you sent my office a forged document 2 weeks ago, and tonight you appear to have presented another one. Have you ever watched a predator realize it has been stalked? That is what I saw on Julian's face when Marcus Thorne spread those papers under my chandelier. My son had spent months planning this ambush. He never considered that someone had been planning a counter-ambush for years." Elena moved to Julian's side, her hand finding his arm. "What documents? What is he talking about?" Marcus ignored her. He pulled a thick sheaf of papers from the folder trust documents, bearing my father's signature notarized and witnessed dated 18 months before his death. "Mr. Carter," Marcus addressed me now, his voice carrying the weight of a formal proceeding, "your father established a separate investment trust in addition to the property deed for Oak Ridge. The total value at his death was $950,000, distributed among 3 beneficiaries. Your son Julian is one of them. His share amounts to approximately $316,000. Julian's eyes widened. I could see him recalculating, reassessing. Nearly $333,000 he had not known about. But Marcus was not finished. Article 6 of this trust contains what we call a forfeiture clause. He turned to Julian with the patience of a man who had delivered bad news to hundreds of families. "I suggest you read Section 3 aloud, for the record. My father built hardware stores for a living. He understood tools. Which ones cut? Which ones measure? Which ones destroy? The forfeiture clause was not a legal document. It was a bear trap made of paper, and Julian had just stepped into it with both feet." Julian took the document Marcus held out. His hands were steady. I will give him that, but his voice was not. "Any beneficiary who directly or indirectly contests title possession or beneficial ownership of the residence designated in Schedule A shall forfeit their entire distribution under this trust, and shall be treated as if they were no longer eligible to receive anything." Elena's brow furrowed. "What does that mean, predeceased?" Marcus turned to her with the same calm expression he had worn since he walked through my door. "It means, Mrs. Carter, that if your husband continues what he started tonight, the trust will treat him as if he died before your grandfather. His $316,000 share will transfer to the alternate beneficiaries. He will receive nothing." The room went silent. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. $316,000. That is what Julian stood to lose if he spoke another word against my ownership of Oak Ridge. I watched him do the math in his head. The house was worth $1.8 million. His trust share was worth $316,000. If he could somehow force the sale or transfer of the property, he would come out ahead by nearly $1.5 million. I watched him decide the house was worth more. Julian set down the trust document with exaggerated care. His face had gone through shock, then calculation, and now settled into something I recognized from his childhood. The expression he wore right before he broke something and blamed someone else. "Fine." His voice was too calm, too controlled. "Keep the trust money. I do not need it." Elena's head turned sharply toward him. "Julian," I said, "I do not need it." Julian's eyes locked onto mine with a coldness I had never seen before. "That money was never the point, Dad. The house is the point, and I will have it one way or another." Marcus's pen stopped moving. He looked at Julian with something that might have been professional interest, or might have been the way a scientist looks at a particularly aggressive specimen. Mr. Carter, Marcus's voice carried a warning now. I would advise you to think very carefully about your next words. But Julian was already turning toward the door, Elena scrambling to gather their things behind him. I have thought about them. He did not look back. I will be back tomorrow. With a sheriff. With a moving truck. With whatever it takes. That house should have been mine. And one way or another it will be. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the chandelier. Marcus Thorne closed his folder and looked at me with eyes that had seen this kind of family destruction before. Mr. Carter, he said quietly, I believe we need to discuss what other protections your father put in place, because your son just declared war. The echo of Julian's threat still hung in the air when Marcus reached into his leather folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He did not hand it to me. He handed it to Julian, who had paused at the doorway, one hand still on the knob. Before you leave, Mr. Carter. Marcus's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I think you should see this. Julian snatched the paper from Marcus's hand. I watched my son's face change as his eyes moved across the page. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked very much like fear before he locked it down behind that cold mask he had been wearing all night. You sent this to my office on November 12th. Marcus folded his hands in front of him like a professor addressing a particularly slow student. 2 weeks before tonight, attached was a document claiming your father had agreed to transfer Oak Ridge to you by December 31st. 2 weeks. The words hit me like a physical blow. Julian had been planning this for at least 2 weeks. The Thanksgiving ambush was not desperation. It was not a son reaching the end of his rope. It was the execution phase of a longer plan. That was a preliminary discussion document. Julian's voice had gone flat, not binding. It was forged, Mr. Carter. Marcus pulled another document from his folder, a side-by-side comparison of signatures. We keep specimen signatures from probate. Your father's signature on this document does not match a single sample we have on file. Not the loops, not the pressure, not the slant, not even the way he dotted his lowercase I. Do you know what it feels like to discover your son has been lying to you for weeks? Not in small ways. Not white lies about where he was or what he spent, but lies that were designed to steal your home. Lies that required lawyers and forged signatures and careful timing. That is not desperation. That is architecture. That is a blueprint for betrayal drafted and revised and executed with precision. You have been planning this for weeks. My voice came out steady, but my hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table to hide it. Julian did not deny it. He did not even try. I have been trying to protect this family for months. His chin lifted with a defiance I recognized from his teenage years, when he used to lie about where he had been on Saturday nights. Someone has to think about the future. Protect the family. I almost laughed. By forging my signature, by trying to gaslight me into thinking I am losing my mind, by showing up on Thanksgiving to steal my home. Julian tossed the paper onto the table. It landed next to the cold turkey, next to the untouched pie, next to the ruins of a holiday that should have been about gratitude. The house is worth what. He turned to Marcus now, his voice taking on the cadence of a man doing calculations out loud. 1.8 million. And you are threatening me with 316,000. I watched Julian do arithmetic at my dining table the way a general calculates acceptable casualties. $316,000 lost. 1.8 million gained. Net profit of nearly 1.5 million. My home reduced to a line item. My life reduced to a rounding error. I am informing you of the legal consequences of your actions. Marcus's voice remained steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Nothing more. Consider me informed. Julian straightened his tie, that expensive tie, that cost more than my monthly utilities. I will take my chances. Elena had been silent through all of this, standing just behind Julian, like a shadow in heels. But now she spoke, her voice carrying the same manufactured concern she had used earlier. Julian, maybe we should discuss this privately. There is nothing to discuss. Julian did not even look at her. He can keep the trust money. I am going to get what I am actually owed. And then Elena nodded. Just once. Just slightly. A small tilt of her chin that anyone else might have missed. But I saw it. My daughter-in-law had just voted to steal my home, and she did it with a smile still playing at the corners of her mouth. Julian turned back to me one final time. His eyes were cold, calculating, empty of anything that resembled the boy I had raised. I will be back tomorrow, Dad, with proper legal authority, with documentation you cannot wave away, with people who will not be fooled by whatever scheme you and this trustee have cooked up. He grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the door. This house was supposed to be mine. His voice cracked just for a moment before hardening again. Grandfather promised. Mom promised. Everyone promised. And I am done waiting for promises to be kept. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the chandelier crystals. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and then there was silence. Cold November air rushed in from where the door had not quite latched, carrying the smell of dead leaves and the promise of worse to come. I sat there for a long moment staring at the space where my son had stood. Marcus began gathering his documents, sliding papers back into his leather folder, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had witnessed family destruction many times before. But then he paused, his hand resting on something still inside the folder. "Mr. Carter," his voice was quieter now, almost gentle, "there is something else you should know." I looked up at him. My body felt heavy, waterlogged with exhaustion and grief. "Something I found in your late wife's archived correspondence with your son." He pulled out a small stack of printed emails held together with a binder clip. I did not want to show you this in front of them. I felt the blood drain from my face. Constance had been gone for 3 years. Cancer had taken her in a matter of months. And I had spent every day since then missing her, mourning her, keeping her memory alive in every corner of this house. What could she possibly have to do with tonight? Marcus set the emails on the table in front of me. "I think you need to read these," he said, "before your son comes back." I could not sleep, not after what Marcus had shown me. So at 2 a.m. I found myself standing in Constance's library, surrounded by her books and her silence and the ghost of a woman I thought I knew. My late wife Constance had been an English professor at Savannah State for 30 years, before cancer took her 3 winters ago. A woman who loved Dickens and hated television, and who I thought I knew completely. Her old computer still sat on the desk exactly where she had left it. I had never had the heart to move it. Now I understood why my heart had been warning me. I sat down and logged into her archived email account. Marcus had given me enough hints to know where to look. I typed Julian's name into the search bar and watched a decade of messages populate the screen. The first email was dated 2015. "Your father means well, but he does not understand creative people. You deserve support, not lectures. I have tried to talk to him, but you know how rigid he can be. Do not let his disappointment define you." I scrolled down. 2018. "The loan situation is not your fault. Your father has always been too rigid about money. He does not understand that sometimes investments take time to mature. I have put some money aside for you. Do not tell him." And then 2021, 2 years before she died. "Do not let him make you feel small. Oak Ridge will be yours someday. I have made sure of it. Your grandfather may favor your father now, but these things have a way of working out. Trust me. I loved Constance. I loved her for 34 years. I held her hand when she died, when the monitors flatlined, and the nurses came in with their quiet efficiency and their practiced sympathy. I mourned her every day in this house she helped me build. And now I was reading emails where she told our son that I was the reason for his failures, that I did not understand him, that I was too rigid, too harsh, too demanding. She had been poisoning him against me for a decade, and she did it with a smile I thought was love. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for the first gray light of dawn to creep through the library windows. Long enough for my coffee to go cold. Long enough for the knock at the back door to startle me back into the present. Robert Sterling stood on my back porch holding 2 cups of coffee and a laptop bag. My 58-year-old neighbor of 15 years, a retired FBI special agent who had spent 2 decades investigating white-collar criminals. He had noticed Julian's rental car parked down the street 3 times in the past week, and had called me about it twice. I had not listened. "You look like hell, Michael." He handed me a fresh cup and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Marcus called me, said you might need some help. Marcus was already in the study when we arrived, his leather folder open on my desk. Documents spread across the surface. I had been analyzing the metadata on the forged signature. Marcus gestured to the tablet still sitting where Julian had left it. Robert, take a look at this. Robert's FBI laptop hummed to life. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the efficiency of a man who had spent years chasing paper trails. This is not amateur work, Michael. Robert's voice was grim. Someone used AI to analyze your typing patterns, the hesitation on your capital A, the trailing off at the end of your signature, the pressure variations. It is all there. They harvested samples from your old emails and fed them into a deepfake generator. My son hired someone to create a fake version of me. Robert looked up from the screen. Your son hired someone very expensive to create a very convincing fake version of you. This level of forgery costs money. Money your son apparently does not have. Robert mounted a camera behind my father's portrait in the hallway. The old man's painted eyes now had digital ones hidden behind them. I thought about what my father would say if he could see this. His house turned into a trap. His grandson turned into a thief. Elias would have understood. He spent his whole life watching people and planning for the worst. The last camera went behind my grandmother's portrait at exactly 7:08 a.m. Robert checked his phone and nodded. All feeds live. All motion sensors active. If anyone moves inside this house, we will know about it. I walked to the front window to watch the sun rise over the live oaks. The mist was still thick, clinging to the ground like something reluctant to leave. And through that mist I saw something that made my blood run cold. A black SUV parked at the edge of my driveway, engine running. Windows tinted dark enough that I could not see inside. Robert, I kept my voice steady. That SUV. Has it been there long? Robert moved to the window beside me. His expression changed immediately. 20 minutes at least. I noticed it when I came in. Do you recognize it? No. Robert pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted less than 3 minutes. When he hung up, his face was grave. Michael, your son is in serious trouble. Crypto crash. Leveraged trading positions. He lost everything 6 months ago and then some. How much? He owes private lenders over $800,000. Robert's voice was quiet. Those are not patient people, Michael. They do not send lawyers. They send men in black SUVs who idle in driveways at 6:30 in the morning. $800,000. My son was not trying to steal my house because he was greedy. He was trying to steal it because someone would hurt him if he did not. Julian was a drowning man, and he was trying to pull me under to save himself. That makes him more dangerous, I said. Much more dangerous. Robert nodded. A desperate man does not calculate risk. He just acts. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then held it up for me to see. Driveway camera. Someone is pulling up. I watched the feed. A white van appeared through the mist. Behind it, a Chatham County Sheriff's cruiser, and stepping out of a rental car behind both of them was my son Julian, carrying 2 duffel bags and wearing the expression of a man who had decided to stop pretending. The pounding shook the walls at exactly 7:12 a.m. 3 heavy fists against oak that rattled the china cabinet and sent the crystal chandelier swaying above the foyer. I was already moving toward the door with Robert 2 steps behind me and the deed to Oak Ridge in my hand. Through the beveled glass, I could see Julian flanked by strangers in matching polo shirts, asset recovery solutions printed across their chests. Behind them stood a white van with its rear doors open, ready to swallow my belongings. A locksmith waited near the porch steps with a tool bag at his feet, and behind all of them a Chatham County deputy stood with his hands on his belt, watching everything with the careful neutrality of a man who had seen too many families try to use his badge as a weapon. Deputy Wesley Norris of the Chatham County Sheriff's Office was a 45-year-old officer with the careful posture of someone who understood that civil standby calls were minefields dressed up as paperwork. He did not smile when I opened the door. He did not frown either. He simply watched. Deputy, thank you for coming. Julian's voice was loud-pitched to carry. This is a family matter. My father is having some confusion about the property, and we just need to help him transition to something more suitable. Let me tell you what it feels like to defend your home from your own child. You stand in the doorway of a house you built with your hands and your savings and your years, and your son stands on the porch with strangers he hired to take it from you, and a deputy watches to make sure nobody gets hurt while your family tears itself apart. That is what Thanksgiving weekend looks like in my family. Sir, Deputy Norris held up one hand, stopping Julian mid-performance. I'm here for a civil standby. That means I keep the peace. I do not take sides. Who owns this residence? I stepped forward, the deed in my hand. I do. Michael Carter. I have the deed right here. Recorded transfer from my father Elias Carter, dated March 2024. Property taxes in my name. Homeowner's insurance in my name. This has been my primary residence for 40 years. The deputy took the deed and examined it. His expression did not change, but I saw his eyes move across the legal language, the county seal, the notarized signatures. Julian's smile tightened. He is not thinking clearly, deputy. We have documentation showing he agreed to let me move in. Julian reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. He held it up like a winning lottery ticket, that smile spreading across his face. The smile I had seen when he was 12 and blamed his brother for a broken window. When he was 25 and explained why the loan money had disappeared. That smile was a mask, and masks only work when no one knows to look behind them. Here, occupancy agreement, signed last month. He agreed to let me move into the guest wing pending family transition. I looked at the paper Julian held. My name was on the signature line, but it was not my signature. The loops were wrong. The slant was off. It was another forgery, just like the transfer of ownership he had shown me on Thanksgiving. That is not my signature. Deputy Norris looked at the document, then at me, then at Julian. Mr. Carter, he addressed my son now, his voice carrying the weight of procedure. Do you have a court order authorizing entry or change of locks? Julian's smile flickered. This is a family agreement. We do not need a court order. Without a court order and with the deeded owner present, I cannot authorize forced entry. The deputy's voice was flat final. This appears to be a civil dispute over property rights. That is for the courts to decide. The locksmith had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort. He was a 34-year-old professional, named Garrett Ballard. I could read his name on the patch stitched to his work shirt. He had the look of a man who had taken this job expecting a routine lock change and found himself standing in the middle of a family war. Garrett, Julian turned to him, his voice taking on an edge. Change the locks. That is what I hired you for. Garrett looked at me. He looked at the deputy. He looked at the deed still in Deputy Norris's hand. Then he began backing toward his van. I am not changing locks during a disputed occupancy. His voice was quiet but firm. Not without paperwork from a judge. Sorry. I hired you. Julian's voice was rising now. I paid you $300, and I will refund every cent. Garrett was already at his van, tossing his tool bag inside. But I'm not losing my license over this. Good luck, sir. The locksmith walked away, just like that. $300 in his pocket if he stayed, his license and his conscience if he did not. Garrett Ballard chose his conscience. And I watched my son's face crumble as his entire plan collapsed, because one honest man said no. Julian stood on my porch, his asset recovery team looking at each other uncertainly, his deputy escort offering nothing but neutral silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought he would leave. I thought the siege had failed. Then I heard the crunch of gravel from the side of the house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Robert's hand went to my arm, a warning grip. I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. The camera alert showed the mudroom door, the side entrance that led into the back hallway. The door was open, and walking through it carrying a plastic storage tote was Elena. She was already inside. I looked at Julian. He was watching me with a strange expression. Not surprise, not concern, satisfaction. The front door assault had been a distraction. While I was defending the porch, Elena had slipped around back. And whatever was in that storage tote, she was planting it in my house right now. Julian smiled. You should check on your property, Dad. He straightened his tie. I hear there have been some changes. A silver sedan pulled in behind the patrol car, and I recognized it immediately. Marcus Thorne stepped out carrying his leather folder like a shield. Julian's face changed when he saw the trust administrator. Not fear exactly, something closer to recognition. The look of a chess player who just realized his opponent had been watching him set up the board. Deputy Norris. Marcus approached the porch with the measured stride of a man who had delivered bad news to powerful families for 30 years. I am Marcus Thorne, Trust Administrator for the Elias Carter Estate. I have documentation relevant to this dispute. Julian took a step back, just one step, but I saw it. Marcus opened his leather folder and pulled out 2 documents. He laid them side by side on the porch railing where Deputy Norris could see them clearly. This email was sent to my office on November 12th. Marcus pointed to the first document. It claims Mr. Carter Sr. agreed to transfer Oak Ridge to his son by December 31st. This document was presented today claiming the same agreement for occupancy. Notice the identical language. Notice the identical signature patterns. Both are forgeries. Deputy Norris leaned forward to examine the papers. His neutral expression did not change, but I saw his eyes narrow. Mr. Thorne, are you saying these documents are fraudulent? I am saying the trust office keeps specimen signatures from probate. Neither of these matches Mr. Carter's authentic signature. We have expert analysis confirming they were AI generated using harvested typing patterns. I want you to understand what it feels like to watch your son get caught. Not the satisfaction you might expect. Something hollower. I watched Julian's face as Marcus laid those documents side by side, and I did not see my boy anymore. I saw a stranger who had been wearing my son's face for years, maybe decades, and I wondered how long I had been fooled. This is harassment. Julian's voice was rising now, losing its rehearsed calm. My father is confused, and these people are taking advantage of an elderly man. Marcus did not even look at him. He kept his attention on Deputy Norris. Deputy, I am prepared to provide these documents as evidence if you wish to file a report. The pattern of forgery is clear. 2 separate documents, 2 weeks apart, using identical fraudulent methods. This is not a family misunderstanding. This is premeditated fraud. Deputy Norris looked at Julian, then at me, then at the documents spread across the porch railing. Mr. Carter. He addressed my son now, and his voice had lost some of its careful neutrality. I am going to recommend you leave this property. If you have a legitimate claim, pursue it through the courts. But based on what I am seeing here, I would strongly advise you to consult an attorney before taking any further action. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at me with something that might have been hatred, might have been desperation. This is not over, Dad. If you are still with me at this point, please leave a quick comment to let me know you're still following this journey. Just type stay if you're standing with me or justice if you want to see Julian face the consequences. Your engagement helps more than you know. Also, a quick word of caution, the following part of the story contains some dramatized elements and may not be entirely factual if that isn't for you. I understand if you choose to stop the video right here. How do you coordinate a theft of someone's home? You need a distraction. You need a decoy. You need one person making noise at the front door while the other slips in through the back. Julian was the noise, Elena was the knife, and I almost missed her completely. My phone vibrated silently in my pocket. I had almost forgotten about the cameras, almost forgotten that Robert and I had spent the early morning hours installing motion sensors behind family portraits throughout the house, almost forgotten that while Julian staged his assault on the front porch, there was another entrance he knew about, the mudroom, the side door that led through the garage into the back hallway. I pulled out my phone and glanced at the screen. The camera feed showed the mudroom door. It was open, and walking through it already inside my house was Elena. She was carrying a plastic storage tote. Robert's hand touched my arm. He had seen it too. Go! His whisper was barely audible. I will keep them talking. Catch her before she finishes. 4 hours. That is how long ago Robert and I had finished installing those cameras. 4 hours between being defenseless and catching my daughter-in-law breaking into my home. If Julian had attacked at dawn instead of waiting until 7:12, I would have lost everything. I handed my phone to Marcus without a word. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. Then I moved toward the side hallway, Robert already ahead of me, his FBI training taking over. The house was quiet. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors I had refinished with my own hands. I could hear Julian's voice, still arguing on the front porch, still performing his outrage for the deputy. He had no idea I was no longer listening. Through the screen door at the end of the hallway, I could see the mudroom. Elena was kneeling on the floor. The plastic storage tote was open beside her, its contents spread across the tiles. I could see clothes, men's clothes, a shaving kit, toiletries, and a stack of envelopes. Mail, addressed to Julian Carter, at my address. She was manufacturing evidence, planting proof that my son already lived here. If she finished and I had not caught her, Julian could have claimed established residency. He could have argued that the forged documents were merely formalizing an existing arrangement. He could have turned my own mudroom into a weapon against me. Elena was arranging the envelopes, carefully positioning them to look like they had been there for weeks. She was humming softly to herself, a song I did not recognize. The hum of a woman who thought she was winning. She had no idea I was watching. She had no idea that every movement she made was being recorded by the camera, hidden behind my grandmother's portrait. And she had no idea that in approximately 15 seconds, I was going to walk through that door and end her little performance. Robert caught my eye and nodded once. I put my hand on the doorknob. I stepped into the mudroom doorway, and Elena froze with a stack of envelopes in her hands. For one long second, we just looked at each other. Her kneeling on my floor, surrounded by staged evidence. Me standing in the doorway with my phone already recording. Behind me, I could hear Robert calling for the deputy. The game was over. She just did not know it yet. Michael. Elena's voice was high-thin. This is not what it looks like. I was just bringing some of Julian's things. His things. I kept my voice steady the way I used to keep it steady on construction sites when contractors tried to tell me the foundation was fine. In sealed envelopes addressed to my house. Postmarked this week. I watched her eyes dart to the envelopes in her hands. Fresh postmarks. November 24th, 3 days ago. Still sealed. Never opened. Never delivered here legitimately. Sealed envelopes. That was the detail that broke them. Not the forged signatures. Not the staged clothes spread across my mudroom floor. The fact that the mail had never been opened. You cannot claim to live somewhere when you have never read your own mail there. Elena had brought the evidence of her own crime in a plastic tote and arranged it neatly on my floor. Deputy Norris appeared in the doorway behind Robert. He took one look at the scene, Elena on her knees, the scattered clothes, the toiletries, the stack of sealed envelopes, and his hand went to his radio. Ma'am, step away from those items, please. Deputy, this is a family matter. Elena was trying to smile, now that same customer service smile she had worn on Thanksgiving. We are just helping Michael organize some of his things. Ma'am. Deputy Norris's voice had gone flat. This appears to be evidence tampering. Please step back. Elena's smile cracked. She looked past me, past Robert, searching for Julian, but Julian was still on the front porch, still performing his outrage for an audience that had already stopped watching. Deputy Norris pulled out his phone and began photographing. The tote, the staged mail with its damning postmarks, the men's clothes that had never been worn in this house, the shaving kit still in its plastic packaging. Each flash of the camera was another nail in the coffin of their scheme. Julian appeared in the doorway. His face went ash white when he saw the scene, when he saw the deputy documenting everything. Elena, what are you doing? Julian. I was just trying to help. Her voice was plaintive now, the confidence completely gone. Marcus stepped forward, his leather folder open. The mail is postmarked November 24th. 3 days ago. Still sealed. Never opened. Never delivered here legitimately. He turned to Deputy Norris. This is manufactured evidence of residency. They were attempting to establish a false claim of occupancy. Let me tell you about the moment I knew my father had saved me. Not from Julian. My father saved me from myself. Because if Oak Ridge had been sellable, I might have given it to my son just to stop the fighting. I might have surrendered to keep the peace. But Elias knew me. He knew I would bend. So he made sure I could not break. I walked out to the front porch. The cold November air hit my face, and I breathed it in, letting it clear my head. Julian followed Elena, trailing behind him, the deputy escorting them both. There is something else you should know, Julian. I kept my voice calm, measured, something your grandfather made sure of. Marcus opened his folder and pulled out another document. Oak Ridge is held in a restrictive trust. His voice carried the weight of legal finality. No sale or transfer permitted for 10 years from the date of Mr. Elias Carter's death. Julian's face went through confusion, then calculation, then something that looked like despair. That cannot be right. Even if you had succeeded today. I let the words land one at a time. Even if your forged documents had worked. Even if Elena had planted enough evidence to confuse a judge. You could not have sold this house. Not to pay your debts. Not to satisfy your creditors. Not for any reason. For 10 years. You are lying. Marcus held out the trust documents. I have the paperwork here. Would you like to read it yourself? Julian did not take the papers. He just stood there staring at the house he had tried to steal. The house that his grandfather had made untouchable. Deputy Norris closed his notepad. I have documented trespass, attempted fraud, and evidence tampering here today. His voice was official now, the careful neutrality replaced by something harder. This is my formal warning. If either of you returns to this property claiming possession without a valid court order, you will be arrested for criminal trespass. Marcus stepped forward. And if you continue to interfere with Mr. Carter's residence, I will file for immediate enforcement of the forfeiture clause. Your entire trust share will be gone. All $316,000 transferred to the alternate beneficiaries. You will receive nothing. Julian looked at me. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. Might have been the boy I used to know, the one who asked me questions about concrete and handed me tools on Saturday mornings. Dad, please, you do not understand what I am dealing with. I understand exactly what you are dealing with, Julian. I let the exhaustion show in my voice now. I just do not understand when you decided I should pay for it. Julian stood on my porch, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Not physically smaller. Something else. The arrogance was gone. The calculation was gone. What remained was a 41-year-old man who had just discovered that his father was not the easy target he had assumed. I should have felt victorious. I only felt tired. Julian and Elena walked to their car without another word. The deputy drove away. The asset recovery team had left an hour ago. The white van was gone. The porch was empty. Marcus began gathering his documents. But then he stopped. His hand rested on his leather folder, and he did not meet my eyes. There is one more thing, he said quietly. Something from your father's files that I did not want to show you until this was over. I felt the exhaustion settle deeper into my bones. What is it? A video. From the smoke detector in your father's bedroom. Marcus finally looked at me. I think you need to see what your son did on the night your father died. My stomach dropped. What kind of video? The video was grainy, black and white, time-stamped 8 months ago, March 15th, 2025, the day my father died. Marcus turned his laptop toward me in the study, and I saw something I had never expected to see. My father's bedroom. The smoke detector in the corner had been watching, and it had recorded everything. Your father had this installed without telling anyone. Marcus's voice was quiet. The footage was stored on a cloud server I only discovered last week when I was reviewing his digital assets. What am I looking at? March 15th, 6:47 a.m., the morning your father passed. Watch the timestamp. On the screen, my father lay in his bed. Even in the grainy footage, I could see him struggling, his hand clutching his chest, his mouth open, gasping. A heart attack, the final one. Then Julian entered the frame. My son walked into his grandfather's bedroom. He saw my father in distress. And instead of reaching for the phone, instead of calling for help, instead of doing what any human being would do, Julian walked to the nightstand. He opened the top drawer. He began searching. 43 seconds. I have built bridges that took years to design. I have watched concrete cure for days. I understand patience. But 43 seconds while your grandfather needed help most, that is not patience, that is calculation. Julian was not frozen with shock. He was searching, methodically, drawer by drawer, lifting papers, checking underneath, while my father gasped for breath 10 feet away. The timestamp in the corner of the screen ticked forward. 6:47:12, 6:47:25, 6:47:38, 6:47:55. 43 seconds before Julian finally reached for his phone. He was looking for the trust documents. Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. We found his fingerprints on the filing cabinet in your father's closet. He had been through everything. My father was dying. My voice came out hollow, and Julian was looking for paperwork. Marcus closed the laptop. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The son I raised was already gone. He had died long before my father did. What remained was something else, something that valued documents over a dying man's final breaths, something that calculated inheritance while a heart stopped beating. The Georgia State Troopers arrived at Oak Ridge 2 hours later. Their boots echoed with finality on the hardwood floors I had spent years refinishing. 2 officers in gray uniforms with badges that caught the afternoon light. Julian Carter and Elena Carter. The lead trooper's voice was flat professional. You are being detained for investigation into document fraud, criminal trespass, and evidence tampering. Watching your own son being led away in handcuffs isn't like the movies. There is no swelling music or dramatic overhead shot. There is only the hollow, sickening sound of a car door closing and the sudden, terrifying silence of a driveway that used to be filled with the sounds of a family. You don't feel justice. You only feel a part of your soul breaking that no court ruling can ever fix. Julian's wrists were cuffed behind his back. Elena stood beside him, her perfect posture finally crumbling, her customer service smile gone forever. Dad, please. Julian's voice cracked. You do not understand. I understand perfectly, Julian. I kept my voice steady, though it cost me everything. I just watched you search your grandfather's nightstand while he was dying. Julian's face went white. He had not known about the camera. He had not known anyone was watching. The trooper guided him toward the cruiser. Elena followed, escorted by the second officer. Neither of them spoke another word. Marcus stood beside me on the porch. I have filed the enforcement motion, he said quietly. The trustee will make the final determination within 2 weeks. What happens to his share? If the forfeiture is confirmed, it transfers to your father's alternate beneficiaries. Marcus pulled a document from his folder. A veterans housing nonprofit called Homefront Haven and the Chatham County Library Foundation. Your father supported both organizations for decades. The money would not come to me. It would not stay in the family. It would go to strangers, to causes my father believed in. Even in death, Elias had made sure that if Julian betrayed the family, the money would go somewhere useful instead of rewarding the betrayal. Julian looked back at Oak Ridge one last time as the trooper opened the cruiser door. I had seen that look before, on the faces of men whose bridges had collapsed, men who had calculated wrong, who had cut corners and watched the structure fail. My son had built his whole scheme on a foundation of lies. Now he was watching it all come down. The cruiser door closed. The engine started. Gravel crunched as the vehicle pulled away, taking my son and his wife toward whatever came next. The driveway went quiet. Robert put a hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Marcus began packing his files. The leather folder that had held so much evidence, so many documents, so much proof of my son's betrayal. He was almost to the door when he paused. There will be a final determination from the trustee within 2 weeks, he said. But there is one more thing your father left. I looked at him. My body felt heavy, waterlogged with exhaustion and grief. A letter. Marcus's voice was careful now. I found it in a hidden compartment in his desk, behind a false panel. Your father addressed it to someone named Daniel Carter. I stared at him. There is no Daniel Carter in my family. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. That is why I thought you should see it. He pulled an envelope from his folder, yellowed with age, sealed with wax, my father's handwriting on the front. Daniel Carter, and beneath the name and address in Charleston, South Carolina. I did not know anyone in Charleston. I did not know any Daniel. But my father had known, and he had something important enough to say that he sealed it in wax and hid it in a secret compartment. I took the envelope from Marcus's hand. The paper was old, but the seal was unbroken. Who is Daniel Carter? Marcus shook his head. I was hoping you could tell me. The call came on a Wednesday morning, December 3rd. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching the live oaks sway in the winter wind when my phone rang. Marcus Thorne. I answered on the second ring, knowing this was the call that would end everything one way or another. The trustee has made the final determination. Marcus's voice was formal measured. Article 6 has been triggered. Both of them. Both Julian and Elena. Their documented actions constitute direct interference with your possession and title. The forfeiture is complete. Through the kitchen window, the Spanish moss shivered in the biting December wind, clinging to the live oaks like tattered gray shrouds. It was the same landscape that had watched over my father's final days. But now it felt different, stripped of its southern charm and left raw by the cold, waiting for a season that hadn't yet arrived. Where does the money go? Your father named alternate beneficiaries. Marcus paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. Homefront Haven, the Veterans Housing Nonprofit in Savannah, and the Chatham County Library Foundation, organizations he supported quietly for decades. He wanted to make sure that if anyone tried to steal from you, the money would go somewhere useful instead. Let me tell you about my father one more time. Elias Carter built 12 hardware stores from nothing. He understood tools and materials and the people who used them. But more than that, he understood consequences. He knew that some people only learn through loss. So he built a trust that taught lessons he would not live to teach himself. $316,000 would house veterans and fill library shelves instead of rewarding the people who tried to steal it. That was not punishment. That was redirection. My father's final act of generosity disguised as a legal clause. I thanked Marcus and ended the call. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee had gone cold. That evening an email arrived. I saw Julian's name in my inbox and my finger hovered over the delete button. But something made me open it. Maybe I needed to know what he would say. Maybe I needed to hear his final words before I closed the door forever. 5 words. That was all he wrote. You chose paper over blood. I read it twice. Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. What do you say to a son who tried to steal your home, who forged your signature, who searched his dying grandfather's nightstand for paperwork instead of calling for help? What words could possibly matter after all of that? I found 8, I typed slowly, deliberately. Each letter a small act of finality. No, your grandfather did, I just read it. I sent it. Then I sat there for a long moment looking at the words on my screen. Julian thought I had betrayed family loyalty for legal documents. He thought this was about paper, but he was wrong. This was about a dead man who had seen him clearly decades before I did. The forfeiture clause was not my choice. It was my father's prophecy fulfilled. Julian had been defeated by a man who died 8 months ago, a man who knew his grandson better than Julian knew himself. I blocked his phone number and email address. I closed every door he might use to reach me again. And then I sat in my kitchen in the house my father had protected, and I listened to the silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of completion, of something finally finished after months of fighting, of a wound that could finally begin to heal. The next morning I went to my father's study. The room smelled of old books and furniture polish, the same way it had smelled when I was a boy, watching my father work at his desk. Sunlight filtered through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The letter Marcus had found was still sitting on the desk, the one addressed to Daniel Carter. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper, sealed with old-fashioned wax, the kind my father used for documents he considered important. His handwriting on the front was careful, deliberate. Daniel Carter. And beneath the name and address in Charleston, South Carolina. I did not know anyone in Charleston. I had never heard the name Daniel Carter in my life. My father had never mentioned him. Not once in 94 years of conversations and shared meals and quiet evenings on the porch. But my father had known him well enough to write him a letter, known him well enough to hide that letter in a secret compartment behind a false panel in his desk, known him well enough to seal it with wax as if the contents were precious. I thought about my father in his final months, the secret meetings with Marcus Thorne, the questions about Julian's finances, the lawyer appointments I only learned about after his death. Elias had been preparing for something, planning for something, and this letter was part of that plan. The wax seal was old but unbroken, red wax pressed with my father's signet ring, the same ring he had worn for 60 years, the same ring that now sat in my dresser drawer because I could not bear to wear it yet. I slid my thumb under the seal. The wax cracked. The envelope opened. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice, and behind it a photograph. I unfolded the letter and began to read my father's careful handwriting. "Dear Daniel," it began, "you do not know me, but I am your great-grandfather. By the time you read this, I will be gone, but I wanted you to know that you were never forgotten." I stopped reading. Great-grandfather. I looked at the photograph. A young man, early 20s, dark hair, a smile that looked familiar in a way I could not quite place. My hands were shaking. I kept reading. I kept reading. "Your father made choices that broke my heart," my father had written in his careful script. "But you are not your father. You are the fresh start our family desperately needed." The letter explained everything. Daniel Carter was 23 years old, a veterinary technician in Charleston who had no idea he was born into a family that would tear itself apart over money and legacy. He was the son Julian never knew he had. Given up for adoption before Julian even graduated college, the product of a relationship Julian had never mentioned to anyone. My father had found him. 3 years ago, Elias hired a private investigator. He tracked down the adoption records, found the young man, and watched him from afar. The letter described what my father had seen: a kind young man who worked at an animal clinic, who volunteered at shelters on weekends, who helped elderly neighbors carry groceries without being asked. "I have watched you from afar for 3 years now," my father wrote. "The way you care for animals, the kindness you show strangers. These are the values I tried to instill in my own son and failed. Perhaps they skipped a generation. 23 years. My grandson had been alive for 23 years, and I never knew he existed. Julian had fathered a child and walked away without a word. He had abandoned his own son the same way he tried to abandon me. But my father had not abandoned Daniel. Elias had established a separate trust. $125,000 held by a different administrator, completely independent from the family estate. Money that Julian could never touch. Money that would give Daniel a chance at a life untouched by the greed that had poisoned everything else. You want to know what 40 years of marriage, 40 years of raising a son, 40 years of believing you understood? Your family teaches you that you never really knew anyone at all. I thought I knew my father. I thought I knew my son. I was wrong about both of them. My father was wiser than I ever realized. My son was darker than I ever imagined. And somewhere in Charleston there was a young man who carried my blood and my father's hopes and had no idea that any of us existed. I set down the letter and looked at the photograph again. Daniel Carter. Dark hair like Julian's. A smile that reminded me of my father. 23 years old, building a life that had nothing to do with Oak Ridge or trust funds or family betrayal. I could leave him alone, let him live his life without the burden of knowing where he came from, without the weight of a family history stained by greed and fraud, and a grandfather who searched for paperwork while his great-grandfather was dying. Or I could reach out, offer connection without pressure, give him the choice my father never got to give him. I spent 3 days writing my own letter, 3 days choosing words, carefully crossing out sentences, starting over. In the end, I kept it simple. I told him who I was. I told him about his great-grandfather. I told him that I had no expectations and made no demands. I just wanted him to know that if he ever wanted to know where he came from, there was a door open in Savannah. I mailed it on December 15th. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in silence. I sat at the head of my dining table, the same table where Julian had slid an eviction notice across the wood 5 weeks earlier, and drank coffee while the live oaks swayed outside my window. The Spanish moss hung in the winter breeze like gray curtains, closing on a very long play. But this was not an ending. It was an intermission. Robert Sterling sat across from me, his own coffee steaming in the morning light. He had come over early, the way neighbors do when they know you should not be alone on Christmas. "You hear anything from Charleston?" "Not yet." I wrapped my hands around my mug. Maybe never. But the letter is out there now. That is all I can do. Robert nodded slowly. He understood. Some doors you open and then you wait. You cannot force anyone to walk through. Your father would be proud of you, Michael. I looked around the dining room, at the chandelier Constance had picked out in 1989, at the hardwood floors I had refinished on my hands and knees, at the windows that looked out over the property my father had entrusted to me. No. I shook my head. He would say I finally stopped being stubborn enough to see what mattered. Robert raised his coffee cup. To Elias, then, and to stubbornness, and to whatever comes next. I raised my cup to meet his. The clink of ceramic echoed in the quiet room. To whatever comes next. Robert left around noon. I washed the breakfast dishes and put them away. I straightened the kitchen. I walked through the house my father had protected, running my hands along the walls, feeling the weight of 40 years in every room. I had lost a son. I had gained a home. I had discovered a grandson I never knew existed. And I had learned that my father had been watching over all of us, even from the grave, planning and protecting and hoping that somehow, someday, the family he built would find its way back to something worth saving. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like peace instead of emptiness. I was drying the last coffee cup when my phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number, Charleston area code. I picked up the phone and looked at the screen. 3 words. I got your letter. I set down the dish towel and stared at the message. My heart was beating faster than it had in months. Not with dread this time, not with fear or anger or the weight of betrayal. With hope. I did not know what would happen next. I did not know if Daniel would want to meet me, or if he would decide the past was better left buried. I did not know if this was the beginning of something, or just a polite acknowledgement before silence. But for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something other than loss. I typed back slowly, 3 words of my own. I am glad. I set down the phone and looked out at the ancient branches of the oaks, where the gray moss hung heavy and still in the twilight. I looked at the home I had fought for, not just the walls and the floors, but the truth that lived inside them. For the first time, the future didn't look like a legal battle or a property line. It looked like a road leading all the way to Charleston, and I waited to see what came next. I used to believe that blood alone could hold a family together. I was wrong. What I lived through was not just a dispute over property, it was family betrayal in its quietest, most calculated form. If there is one thing I would tell you, it is this: do not ignore the signs. I did, and it nearly cost me everything. Family betrayal does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits across from you at dinner, and when it does, you must choose clarity over comfort. I learned that family justice is not revenge, it is protection. It is knowing when to stand your ground, even when it breaks your heart. I used to think keeping peace was the right thing, but peace built on silence only feeds family betrayal. Real strength is facing it, documenting it, and refusing to be erased. That is what family justice looked like for me. I believe God allowed me to walk through this so I could finally see the truth I had avoided for years. Not everyone who shares your name shares your values. And sometimes the only way forward is to let go of who you thought they were. In the end, I lost a son, but I found clarity, and perhaps something new waiting ahead. And that, in its own way, is also family justice. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. I truly appreciate your time. Leave a comment and tell me what would you do if you were in Michael's position facing that kind of choice. I'd really like to hear your perspective. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future videos. A quick note. While inspired by family conflict situations, some elements have been dramatized for storytelling. And if this type of content isn't for you, feel free to explore others that suit you better.